Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to Colorado. In this video, I'd like to talk a little bit about the All-American Motel. When people from around the globe think of the U.S. highway system, images of motels along Route 66 is often what comes to mind. These motels were typically family-owned and operated. They brought with them this certain kind of quiche and charm that made its way deep into the American culture. Increasingly, these icons are being abandoned, repurposed, or demolished. With that in mind, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on how these icons of American innovation came to be and eventually fell from favor. And as we go through, I'd like to share one such motel with you in its current condition. Like all innovation, motels were created out of necessity, one that began on October 1st, 1908, when Henry Ford unleashed his Model T on the American market. Thanks to his innovation of the assembly line, he was able to offer his Model T for the shockingly low price of $360. For the first time, the American working class could afford a vehicle, and they were hungry to explore their vast country. And this was a group that was growing daily. By 1914, Ford had sold 500,000 cars. With the advent of his Tin Lizzie car, the pace of sales only increased. So much so, by 1927, the Tin Lizzie comprised half of the cars on the road. And by this time, Mr. Ford had sold over 15 million automobiles. Now that the automobile was ubiquitous, the American people's desire to explore was at an all-time high. However, travelers and adventure seekers were growing restless with their local roadways. Many of the roads were not yet paved and seldom connected from city to city. The roads that did connect were long and established trails that were basically converted for automobile use. Travelers east of the Mississippi were fortunate to have colonial-era inns to stay in when traveling between towns. However, these inns were few and far between. In the western half of the country, drivers relied on camping and makeshift shelters to rest in between drives. As the number of people on the road increased, the cost of the inns increased too. So much so that they eventually became too expensive for the average American consumer. To alleviate this problem, the U.S. Department of Transportation set up camps across the country. The camps were simple and constructed of Army surplus tents. On a quick side note, I found these paintings still on the wall rather striking. With that aside, let's get back to how these motels got here at all. You see, the road improvements that the U.S. citizens so desperately wanted would have to wait. Because after some of the largest economic growth in U.S. history, the stock market suddenly crashed in 1929, ushering in the Great Depression. This period in U.S. history was fraught with economic hardship, desperation, and hunger. Fortunately, by 1933, America was roaring back from the Great Depression. But many people were still out of work and the roadways needed improvement. The Americans' desire to explore had not gone away. It was merely put on hold until the economy was stable again. The Work Progress Administration, WPA, and similar organizations were able to put many people back to work, building the roadways and electrical infrastructure that millions of Americans crave. In 1939, a man named John Steinbeck envisioned a roadway that crossed the country from Chicago to Los Angeles. He called his design the Road of Flight. Later, his vision would become the internationally known U.S. Highway 66, or Route 66. The original name was designed to evoke the realities of Great Depression-era immigrants and migrants. These were people who were removed from their land by failing crops, heartless banks, and the storms from the Great Dust Bowl. This was a group that struggled to find a sense of home as they drifted along the roads. At this time, some of the earliest motel concepts were developing in the western U.S. These were small, simple structures with a door, bed, and a window, and that was about it. In fact, one of the most common designs was a Sears Roebuck's chicken coop that was just repurposed to be a motel-like cabin structure. The privately owned cabins were sometimes painted to match a design theme such as Western Homestead or Bavarian Village. This was one of the earliest attempts to bring a sense of home and familiarity along for the road trip. However, the cabins themselves sported little amenities. Often a bucket of water and wood was included with your fees. However, if you wanted sheets, pillows, heck, even a mattress, that would have came at an extra charge. Back in the eastern U.S., the colonial-era inns were completely full, but an alternative had developed. People begun to open up their homes to tourists. They'd simply place a sign in the window saying "Rooms for Tourists" and instantly open up a new income stream for their household. They referred to these as tourist homes, and from what I understand, each one was as colorful and unique as the owner itself. In contrast to today's hotels, these were commonly found in town and required searching out to be found. This option gave travelers all of the comforts of home, well, at least all of the comforts afforded to them by the homeowner. This practice was so common that a side industry of printing signs developed. Buried in your attics or deep in an antique shop, you might find some of the original cardboard signs that say "Rooms for Tourists." While the homes helped to bridge the gap, there were more Americans on the road than there were rooms for rent. And here's where the necessity for motels comes in. In the 1930s and 40s, the Eastern U.S. concept of the mom and pop's tourist's home was combined with the cabin concept developed in the Western U.S. These hybrid properties resembled what we've come to know as a motel, but at the time, they were referred to as cottage courts or tourist court. In fact, the area that we're exploring was a cottage court from the 30s. You see, unlike tourists' homes or downtown hotels, these were automobile friendly. Many sported carports and filling stations. The cottage court was becoming a classy alternative to the damp cabins and smoky campfires. They were designed to catch the eye of the passing and weary travelers, and this is where the tradition of silly and somewhat gaudy-themed motel signs came into existence. Later, cafes and restaurants began to appear alongside cottage courts. These cafes were the innovation hub for American cuisine, bringing to us some of the staples that we cook and eat to this day. In fact, it was at the Sanders Court and Cafe where Harlan Sanders created the first batch of fried chicken. And as you may be aware, Harlan later took the name the Kentucky Colonel and founded the KFC company. To me, it's a little ironic that he left the lodging industry to help create the fast food industry, both of which are what we call satellite industries. They were only made possible by Henry Ford's original invention of the car and the resulting roadways that popped up around it. But many cottage court owners, such as the Kentucky Colonel, had good reason to leave the lodging industry. This is because the U.S. motel industry had its second big recession during World War II. Many of the things required for a road trip were rationed for the war effort, such as gasoline, oil, tires. All of it went to support the troops. Many of the ration materials were used to transport troops across the country to be deployed. During this process, soldiers saw areas of the country that they later wanted to revisit with their families or during leisure time. It was U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower who became frustrated with how long it took to transport troops and tanks across the country. He pushed for a highway system that mimicked the German Autobahn. His push succeeded and gave birth to the Federal Interstate Highway System, FIHS. Fortunately for the cottage court owners, they had many years before the interstate system would snake through the country and circumvent the state highways that they relied on, such as Route 66. This time was the golden age of the American motel. Post-war American families were ready to explore the country once again. This time, the name cottage court gave way to motor court, further verifying and cementing America's love and reliance on the automobile. Motor courts specifically catered to automobile owners and were no longer individual cabins. Rather, they were multiple rooms under one roof. Each one brought its own breed of neon lights, bright signs, and eye-catching flair. The buildings themselves were plain and functional concrete block structures. However, they sported these elaborate facades that reflected the flavor and style of the region in which that particular motel was in. The name motel was coined in San Luis Obispo, California, by the Milestone Motel. The name is stuck to this day to refer to hotels that are directly off the roadway. But as we know, the good times came to an end for a majority of the mom and pop motels. By the early 60s, the interstate highway system was very advanced and had circumvented most of the state highway systems. Family-owned motels and motor courts were being replaced by large chains such as Howard Johnson's and Holiday Inn. Today, most Americans prefer the ease and reliability of the interstate highway system and the numerous chain hotels that sit directly off of it. You can still find thriving motels, typically at the intersection of an interstate and state highway. Thanks for spending some time with us, and please do like, comment, and subscribe.